Hi everyone, I'm just sharing my screen now. Hopefully you can see that.
Yes, we can, thank you.
Thank you. So yes, thank you to Millie and Charlotte for having me today. Hopefully today will be a bit of a primer for future sessions. But my name's Kellie Green. I'm a lead interaction designer at the Ministry of Justice, and I wanted to do a bit of a talk around AI for content designers. So the first thing is that I'm from the dark side. So I'm an interaction designer, not a content designer. I don't have your skills and experience, but I do advocate the importance of content design in government. And I work really closely with the lead content designers in MOJ around this. I feel very passionate about it. Also, it's interesting that this image raises one of the concerns around intellectual property, obviously. But yes, just a caveat, obviously I'm not a content designer. So today I wanted to cover the background of artificial intelligence using AI chatbots and some of the limitations and ethics. But first I wanted us to go back a little bit and look at what is all the fuss about. So artificial intelligence has been talked about and explored since around the 1950s. So you're probably thinking, what has actually changed in the last couple of years, and how does it relate to the tools that people are currently experimenting with, like ChatGPT? So I've created this, what I call the family tree of ChatGPT. And I wanted to take you through it because I think it's really important to understand some of the background as to why we are where we're at. So I'm going to jump across to a Miro board. And by the way, I'll be sharing the slides and everything here, so you don't have to worry about trying to copy that. So this is my family tree of ChatGPT, and if you're like me, you haven't done a computer science degree, but I have had two people who have done computer science degrees to check this over, so hopefully it's quite accurate. So like I said, around the 1950s was the birth of AI. This is Alan Turing, who is seen as the godfather of computer science. And essentially, artificial intelligence is, in a nutshell, when machines simulate human intelligence. So from there are many forms of artificial intelligence, but one of those that's relevant in this case is what's called machine learning. And machine learning is a type of artificial intelligence that enables computers to learn from data without being explicitly programmed. So we wouldn't be where we're at now if it wasn't for this particular advancement. We then have other forms of machine learning, but the relevant one in this case is what's called neural networks. So neural networks are a type of machine learning model inspired by the function of the brain. So from there, we have other forms of neural networks, but the relevant one here is called transformers. So transformers are a type of neural network that processes data in a way that understands the context and the patterns that are it's better for natural language processing. And this is really what has unlocked what we can call the generative AI era. So around 2017, researchers at Google managed to figure this out. And this has been a real advancement in terms of where we're at now. It is based on this. So from there, we have what we call models. So we have large language models, text to image models. So you may be familiar with some of these terms. You may have heard things like large language models. So these are transformer-based models. So in one case, there's transformer-based models that are trained on large amounts of data to generate text. And when it comes to text to image models, it's the same, but they're trained on large amounts of data to generate images. So again, these are transformer-based models. They're using that technology, that way of being able to understand the context and the patterns to be able to then generate things. So this is how we're able to, again, be where we're at. And then from there, from having those large language models, we have the models themselves. So that's just the concept of the model. So then we have actual models which have been created by organizations, and then we have the applications that sit underneath them. So in the case of the text, sort of text models, so we have things like examples like GPT. So you've probably heard GPT-3, 3.5, GPT-4, you may have heard terms like this. So that's large language models that are developed by OpenAI. and it actually stands for generative pre-trained transformer. So they use the term transformer in their name, but there is many other large language models. And then the application that sits underneath that, or the one that we actually see, is ChatGPT. So that's an LLM or large language model based chatbot developed by OpenAI. So it's almost like the large language model is the engine or the what's going on in the background, and ChatGPT is what we see on the front. But there's many, many more large language model or AI based chatbots. And there's links to that, and the same with the with image generation. So we have things like DALL-E, and then we have things like Bing Image Generator, but there's many more as well. So I just wanted to really quickly try and explain the background of why we're at where we're at now. And essentially what it comes down to is this transformer, like I said. So it's a new way to process large amounts of data, and that's helped with natural language processing. It allows tools to provide more accurate responses. And like I said, it's created this generative AI era. There's an article here, and I've also got it in the resources section, which is a really, really good way to explain exactly what a transformer is doing. You can see that it breaks things down, and there's all of the description of how that actually happens. So if you're really interested to understand that, I really recommend the Financial Times article. So like I said, this has led to the generative AI era. And you could think of generative AI as AI that creates new content similar to human generated content. So it's not just looking for patterns, but it's actually creating something new. So things like images, video, music, and text. So as mentioned, one of these tools is ChatGPT. So I think of ChatGPT is like the Hoover of the vacuum cleaner world. So, we started using the term Hoover just to refer to vacuum cleaners because they're very good at branding. And similarly, I think partly because ChatGPT was the first to be released and there was a lot of hype around it, we just start to use that collectively, even though there is other text chatbots, large language model based chatbots like Bard, which Google has released, and many other ones. So I'll continue to use the term ChatGPT, but I just wanted to give you that understanding that when people say that it's just one particular brand, it's like saying Hoover. So ChatGPT generates human-like text based on the input it's given. So it's a bit like a virtual assistant. So thinking about AI shaping the design process, we can think about where will this fit in and what kinds of ways would we maybe use it right now. So there's a really good blog post from Steve Wapshott, and the way that he's broken it down is he's grouped them into various kinds of tasks. So at the top is AI as a utility worker. So that's to replace low-level tasks so that we can focus on strategic thinking and conceptualization, things like that. The next one is AI as a co-pilot. So that can incrementally improve the output, and that's more like co-creating towards an outcome. The next is AI as a creator. So that's generating ideas and content. And that's where it can be part of the team. So it's generating this kind of synthetic material. And our role is then to guide and provide the guardrails around it. So empathizing with users, understanding human nuances, and defining the destination so we can set those principles and direct the generation of the solution. The next one is AI as a coach. So that's to increase performance through smart self-improving systems. So that's kind of like self-initiating systems, and it's moving humans into a facilitator role, and it can adapt and refine experiences to better serve the purpose. So this is where it becomes a little bit more autonomous. And then you've got AI as a pioneer, which is identifying new ways to imagine and create. So this is where it could actively challenge the human creative process and maybe lead to breakthroughs in problem solving. And the way I see this list and the way that Steve has explained it is that the further down you go, the higher the risk level is, at least at the moment. So we know that there's some issues at the moment around potentially bias and many other things. So the more autonomy and the less moderation that we give, then the riskier that the output would be. Whereas some of the higher listed items here, there isn't necessarily as much of a risk. So things like spell checking, for example, which is something we've already been using, but those kinds of things where it can generate something around low level tasks is maybe less of a risk. So I like to focus in this particular area. So things around the utility worker side, the co-pilot and the creator. So these are some of the things from speaking with content designers and having some workshops in the past around the kinds of activities that we may want to do now in our craft, working with AI in our current teams. So I grouped things into, so one around explanation. So things like finding examples of something, explaining or clarifying something, explaining the differences between things, providing summaries of things, and changing the tone and style of things. Again, just to be clear, this is not at all to take away from the skills and experience that content designers have. It's only to be able to work with something, to create ideas, plant seeds, to be able to develop something. And similarly, we have ideation. So Millie mentioned that we have some interactive section here. So the first one I've got here is around generating fake names for a prototype. So in the chat, I'd like you to think about a nonsensical government service, and we can try and see if we can create a name live for that service. So the example that I was testing out was applying for a license for my goose. So if you want to have a think about any nonsensical government services, then please do put it in the chat and we can try that out in a moment. So other things around ideation can be generating fake names for concepts, storyboards and personas, ideas for wording in a tricky sentence, and some of these have actually come from content designers in previous workshops. Ideas for naming a service. Oh, sorry, yeah, I've done the wrong one. I was talking about naming a service, not the fake name for a prototype. But yes, ideas for naming a service, that's the one we're going to be doing. Providing alternative suggestions, creating a draft presentation, and drafting emails. So I really like this quote from Craig Abbott, who is the former head of accessibility at DWP, where he says there's something a bit weird about a human asking an AI to make their writing sound more human. And it's true, but that is where we're at. And these tools are scary, interesting, exciting, and just something that it's best to experiment with and try and understand a little bit more. So one example of what we were working on within the Prison and Probation Service is that the designers who were prototyping and needing to just put in some images as part of their concepts, and also for personas, were using this really sad, really caricature picture of a person in prison, which is really quite unhelpful because it doesn't really allow you to properly empathize. It's kind of comical. So it was really interesting to see one of the designers experimenting with Midjourney to be able to see if we could generate imagery that is not a real person. So there's no issues with that. It creates it's a concept, pardon me, it's a concept that creates that empathy and allows us to create personas that are more realistic, or these kind of concepts within prototypes. So something like this, I feel like, is much better. And of course, we can improve things, we can explore around diversity, but to be able to see a difference between the two, I do feel like that is an improvement. And that's something that hasn't required us to have additional budget to be able to photograph. And again, that is of course another concern around you know, are we actually replacing photographers is another thing. But I guess before generative AI, we wouldn't necessarily be hiring photographers for this kind of work. We'd probably be sourcing free images online or things like that. So it is, again, a really good conversation and discussion around that, but it does feel like it's created this good opportunity for this particular scenario. So on that, I just wanted to check, Millie, is there a nonsensical name that we could use? And I'm going to pull across.
Oh, there are
so that you can
so
see.
many.
Okay.
Yes. So are you after a name for a government service?
Yes.
Okay, I think, how about, this one's had a lot of emojis, so how about the Ministry of Silly Walks official walk certification?
Okay,
Does that fit the bill?
Yes. So let's see. Provide, that's right. So I'm on Microsoft Edge, which has Bing Chat, and Bing Chat is powered by GPT-4. So I'm going to do provide 5 names for the government service. And you might have to repeat it, Millie.
There's so many good ones, but this one was the Ministry of Silly Walks official walk certification. So
Yep.
yeah.
Okay, I think we've got it.
And that was from David Hepburn. Thank you.
And I'm going to add as well, so using the how to name your service, just drop this back over. So I'm using this guidance. So on the service manual, there is the naming your service guidance, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And basically I'm copying this section, which is the kind of the parameters that we use when we're exploring maybe the potential names for a service. We might be doing that through workshops, and also bear in mind that we could, you know, when we're naming a service, we probably go quite broad, quite left field. If they are a bit out there and they don't seem like something that would fit, that's usually what we do in ideation anyway, and that can sometimes help plant a seed to get us to the journey, the destination that we're looking for. So I'm going to add to use this guidance when providing names, something like that. You don't have to worry too much about. Actually, I'm not going to put the URL. I'm going to put this. So sometimes if I put the URL in, I'm not sure if it's actually digesting the information. I have found that it's easier. It's better just to put the information in. So yeah, let's try that. I will show you while it's doing that. I'll show you. Will I show you? Yes. So I did one for applying for a license to keep a goose. And this is the ones that it came up with. So apply to keep a goose, get your goose license, secure your goose permit, apply for your goose permit, and get your goose permission. And what you can do as well is you could do, so you could say then, pretend you are an expert at designing government services and critique the names. I don't know if I spelled critique right, but I think it will be okay. So you can actually get it to crit itself as well. You can also do things where you say, pretend you're 5 people sitting around a desk and one of them is an expert in this and one of them is an expert in that, and get them to basically have a conversation to come up with a solution as well. So here it's reviewing the names, and it's explaining, or it's giving its view about the fact that it might be straightforward or may not stand out. I mean, again, these kinds of things, it may not actually be that useful for us and the work that we do, or those of us in here that work in Gov. But you might find that within this, there's some useful information. And I think as these kinds of tools improve, we will get more accurate and more useful responses. So it's almost a good idea just to experiment with it now, even if you find maybe it isn't that useful, because you'll get to know how to use the tool as time goes on. Now, I'm waiting to see, I'm going to leave it for a bit because I jumped out of it and I might have actually lost the first one, but let's come back to it. So what we're looking at here is called prompt engineering by some, and it may get this kind of expression when the term prompt engineering is used. And I want to just reassure you that I don't think it's anything to be too worried about this term. I think it is a bit of a barrier, when really prompt engineering is just writing stuff. And I think who has the best skills and experience in Gov, or if you're working in the private sector around writing, it's content designers. So this is your space. This is your time to lead and to be excited. And I would say don't be worried about it. Don't be concerned. I think this is like, you've got this basically. So essentially prompt engineering, a prompt is just asking an AI to do something, a task. You've just seen me do it. It's not a big deal. And engineering is structuring what you say and adding some additional information. That's all it's trying to get across. But this term isn't very plain English and isn't very helpful. It can of course be more technical. You can get more technical with prompt engineering, but there is plenty that you can do. So if we start with the basics, it's things like asking questions or commands. So it's a little bit like Google on steroids. And again, we'll go back to ChatGPT, and I'll do a new chat. And I will do, for example, explain how photosynthesis works. And I'll put, so again, you could put parameters around it because it can sometimes go on as well. So I might put in 50 words or less. I believe you can also use the term TLDR, and that does a similar thing as well. It just doesn't go on as much. So here it's providing a response of what photosynthesis is. And then I could put explain as if I'm a smart 12-year-old. What I found is it's quite good with providing metaphors and analogies for things. Sometimes it can be, it feels quite creative to me, at least, someone who isn't skilled in content design, but it feels like it's kind of can be quite imaginative sometimes. So here you can see that it's gone from maybe a pretty vanilla explanation that it's a process that occurs in the leaves of a plant and it needs blah, blah, blah. And then in the next one, it says it's a process that plants use to make food. It happens as in the leaves of the plants, da, da, da. So then you can say in a poem. I mean, it's not super useful. We probably don't need it explained in a poem, but there you go. So these kinds of things, the way that we can do this and get it to be able to continue the conversation is actually how we can add more detail. So I love this image because I wanted something around adding garnish to what we'd started with, and I got an image of in Midjourney of a cocktail that had been garnished with squid, which looks quite interesting, but I'm not sure I'd want to drink it. So the reason why this is possible is part of this transformer and the generative AI technology that I talked about is called in-context learning, and it's the model's ability to temporarily learn from prompts. So successive prompts and replies are considered as at each stage as context. So, you know, if you were to Google what we just did around photosynthesis and then Google again and say, you know, explain as if I'm a smart 12-year-old, it wouldn't know what I'm talking about. And that's what is great about it, is that you can actually have a conversation. So you can do things like provide feedback. So it's too long, too short, too complicated. Could you write it in plain English? Could you write it, you know, explain it to me as if I'm 5, or that sort of thing. Can you write it in more bullet points? Something that just allows things to be summarized, and that can be quite useful for one of the use cases I mentioned about summarizing information. We receive so much these days, and like blog posts, links, you probably get a similar thing on Slack or similar sorts of chats. And this is not to take away from the people that are writing it. And again, this is a concern and something to discuss. But if we get so much of it, it's so hard to keep up with. So there's ways that you can get ChatGPT to be able to summarize that information and maybe provide it in a format that best works for you. You can also get it to, this is a future thing that we could talk about another time, but automate certain processes. So you could get it to write a one-liner of that particular blog post and then get it to post that into your Slack. So you could get these kind of one-liners or something summarizing it, not just the titles, but it actually goes through and provides a little bit more of a summed up description of each blog post. Something that allows you to be able to absorb the information better and then decide what you want to dig into. So other things are around role playing. So you can say, pretend you're a tour guide and describe the attractions in Paris, or as a music teacher, describe how to read sheet music. So the first one is around assigning a role to the AI to guide its behavior. So the AI is expected to respond in a way that mimics the style and language of Shakespeare. So again, intellectual property alert. And the second one around contextual prompts, provide context to guide the AI's understanding. So it's not pretending to be a historian or a music teacher, but it's expected to respond with the depth and detail that a historian might provide. So let's go back and just check on what it's doing. Oops. So, okay, it looks like I messed up a little bit and I lost let's do it again. So I'm going to copy this one because I've got some of the detail. And let's do for a government service that you to, I think it was register your silly walks. I'm just going to put, okay. So let's see what it does here. Okay, so it's not really, in this case, following the guidance that I've given it. So again, it's quite hit and miss, and sometimes it's really about that back and forth in order to get the information that you want, because it's clearly just doing more of a branding exercise maybe than something that's following the guidance. So when it comes to prompt engineering, again, it's something that you can continue to just explore and experiment with in order to get use some of these techniques and improve on how you can interact with it. But at the same time, there is going to be tools that are coming out that will help people write prompts. So there's been talk about prompt engineering being the new type of job, and it's the most upcoming job that exists and things like that. But at the same time, tools like this, for example, gPrompter, instead of having to be able to write all of the perfect prompt to be able to create an image like this, it actually allows you to just choose images done previously or elsewhere and say, I want this kind of style, I want this kind of lighting, and then it would create an image like this for you just by using the term a firefighter. So there's another one called Prompt Perfect, which I've got in the resources, and that one's more about, you might write a prompt and then basically it will provide an output with more detail in it, and then you can review that, you can tweak it as well. But it adds a lot more of basically trying to speak the language that the transformer and the large language model needs to be able to provide a more accurate response. So I think you might see this more in the future, where you don't necessarily have to try and become an expert in how to write prompts. I think potentially we might actually go also down this path of having tools that will help us do that also. But like I said, the most important thing now I would say to do is just start a conversation and just experiment with it. Sometimes it might work, sometimes it might not. And I find that it can, even if it doesn't provide a response that is perfect and that I want to use, it can plant a seed and it can have me thinking about things. Another way that I've used it personally is that I find workshops where you've got a timer really stressful, and I tend to get writer's block. I tend to just go blank. So I'm not a fan of hack days or unconferences or things, because I just find that time-based thing quite stressful. So when we've had experiments like that, workshops like that, I've had ChatGPT on the side, and I've used that to generate ideas that have really sparked my thought. And it's not been that I've then copied and pasted stuff from ChatGPT necessarily and just used what it's written. It's really helped me have someone almost on the side just to have a conversation with, as if there was actually a person next to me, and be able to get me thinking about stuff. And that's been really successful for me as well. So let's talk about some of the limitations and ethics around generative AI generally. So that's both image, text, and other types. So for those that are working in Gov, there is specific government guidance that's been released, and I think it will be updated as we go. It's probably one of those things where they had to get something out quickly, but we'll see more of this in the future. And in a nutshell, it essentially says to use it, go ahead and use it, but 1, don't input sensitive information. 2, comply with protocols, and that's like legal, security, etc. And 3, to check for bias and misinformation. So on the first point, that's why a lot of the examples that I provided, I didn't talk about analyzing research findings or transcribing research or anything that involves actually using the data from our organization or user data. It's more about ideating or using public information. So when I talked about summarizing, it was more about blog posts or maybe information on Gov or other websites, so public information. And again, that's that risk level where it's the lower risk stuff. I think that would be really useful in future, and I know some people have been experimenting with analyzing research findings, accessibility findings, things like that. But again, I do feel like that it's almost too early for that, and things will progress where we will have maybe enterprise versions of the tools where they're locked down, they don't train the data based on what we input, all those sorts of things, and there will be opportunities to use it for those purposes. And again, as I mentioned, checking for bias and misinformation, as you saw already, it does create misinformation quite easily, and it will confidently say things that aren't that useful. So it's again using it as that tool, as that person next to you to have a conversation, and sometimes it'll really resonate, sometimes it won't. So for those working in Gov, there is, as I mentioned, guidance on CDDO, which is linked here, and again I'll share the slides, and also guidance on the Cabinet Office website as well. So some of the other concerns around privacy concerns, so the use of the data, bias in the training data is a big one as well, and also the fact that there's a lack of transparency on how that data is created, where it comes from. It's very much behind those organizations that are releasing the tools that have those models. And the nonsensical or inaccurate responses, and those potentially getting through to people reading them and then believing that that is the case. That's obviously a risk as well. I already mentioned lack of transparency of the large language models. Sustainability issues is a big one, and that's getting bigger and bigger as we go. Actually, people are talking about how much energy is being used when we use things like ChatGPT and other tools. So again, that's something that needs further conversation and seeing how we might limit, or how we would use it, and maybe where we wouldn't use it. There's also the risk around misuse of AI and AI technologies, and also the impact on jobs. So that might get you thinking, you know, but will I lose my job? And I'm in the camp that thinks no, and I think we just need to kind of refocus ourselves. I don't think it's necessarily helpful to have that concern. I think that in fact that in this generative AI era, our skills and experience are actually more important and more valuable than they were before. I do know, of course, you see stories of people getting replaced here and there, and it's obviously quite stressful and quite difficult to kind of deal with and understand. So again, it's another one of those conversations. But I really like this quote from Brad Frost, which says we need critical thinking, ethical thinking, systematic thinking. We still need to foster relationships, to build bridges, to coordinate, to orchestrate. These are human things. And also from one of the workshops that we did with content designers in the past, one of the participants said, as a content designer, I spend more time building relationships than writing content. And I feel like that's the same for a lot of our professions: service design, interaction design, etc., user research. I think so much of what we do is about facilitation, building relationships, finding people and being able to connect things, connect loose threads. And that is our value. And as I say, I think there's a greater importance for our skills and craft in a generative AI era. So what I would recommend is to experiment. So just to play around, try it out, whether it's something that's work related, like naming a service, whether it's just something nonsensical or fun or something personal. You can I worked with a friend on planning a trip. He's Australian, and planning a trip to the Greek islands, and it came up actually with some suggestions that he ended up taking on his trip. This is a new feature in Midjourney that allows you to add 2 images, and it will create a 3rd image, which I haven't tried yet, but I love this bread cat. I think it's so cute. So one idea in your organization is to try prompt battles. This is something I've heard from another person who's a user researcher. So to just play around with doing prompt battles, so have a theme and say, you know, at the end of the day, we're going to share our best output for this particular scenario. And you could do a bit of a battle, and maybe there's prizes or something as well. I would absolutely love your feedback on this. So as I mentioned, I'm an interaction designer and I'm not an expert. I haven't done a computer science degree. And there's a QR code here to a Slido. So if you have the time, either now or the slides will be shared afterwards as well, to give your thoughts on, did this actually explain to you, was it meeting your expectations of what you were looking for? But yeah, I'm really keen to be able to essentially, I'm trying to upskill myself to be able to help explain things to others and share with communities where things are at the moment, which of course is ever changing, but to also get those fundamentals. I think it's really really important to just kind of understand what's going on and why all of a sudden in December 2022, everyone started talking about ChatGPT. If you're on the CrossGov community on Slack, if you're working in Gov, those who are, there is an AI for Designers Slack channel, which we've set up. There's also an AI channel, but there's one particularly around how it affects us, and people can share events, talks, and what they've been up to, things they've experimented with there. I'm also on LinkedIn as well, so feel free to connect there as well. Here's some resources. I didn't want to overload, but the first one is the one I mentioned at the beginning, which is the Financial Times article around the transformer. So explaining what the transformer is, and it's an excellent article. Also, I mentioned Craig Abbott, the former head of accessibility at DWP, has done a really interesting article around ChatGPT, everybody's dirty secret, which I really like because he talks about the stigma that's forming around if you admit or you say that you are using ChatGPT in certain parts of your work, and that people are actually almost going underground and using it but not saying things to their teams, communities, etc. So that's quite interesting as well. And also the Steve Wapshot blog post that talked about those different ways of grouping the kinds of tasks we can do and how there might be a higher risk as we go further down that list. I really recommend for tools, futuretools.io has a list of pretty much all the generative AI tools, maybe not all, but it's a curated list and there's loads of them there, and it's really, really good to have a look at. They also do a newsletter you can sign up to. And there was the two, gPrompter and Prompt Perfect are two examples that I mentioned where instead of needing to become a prompt engineer, the tools that are being formed to help you create better prompts without you having to do it yourself. And the two YouTubers that I've most been following, Matt Wolf is the best. I think if there was one thing out of this entire resource list that you could look at, is just to subscribe to him. He actually also is the founder and the person who does futuretools.io. He does a weekly video that wraps up all the news of generative AI for that week, and I find it very easy to absorb. So instead of having to read all of the articles and things, he just talks about it in a very casual and I find very easy to absorb way. And Go as well, I found recently, who also did the tutorial on Prompt Perfect, and also she's someone who provides very good, easy to understand tutorials and information. So thank you. That was everything for today. Like I said, I'm on LinkedIn and I'd love to hear your questions and your thoughts. And I'd love to just keep learning with you, keep sharing. I think this is what community is all about, and why days like this is so important, is that we can utilize the communities of practice that we've built and set up to be that safe space to start sharing and exploring in this and being excited about it, and not being too worried, because I do think that, yeah, it's going to be a bright future, I think.